I'm Allan Harkness, and I want to change the way the public and professionals think about mental health and mental illness. By way of background, I'm a professor of psychology, and most of my teaching is in the neurosciences. So how do we typically think about mental health and mental illness? Well, let's assess your mental health. We could take down the diagnostic manual that's used in the United States, and we'll see if you're in there. We'll check very carefully. If you're not in there, congratulations, you're a bourgeois burger. You have mental health. But there's something terribly wrong with this approach. Something big and important is missing. What's missing are the real biological systems that create the functions that we call health. In every other clinical discipline, we don't just have a list of disorders. We understand the normally adaptive systems that create health. Cardiologists don't just have a list of heart attacks. They understand the heart and the circulatory system. And they have not explained any single heart attack until they can tell you exactly how that problem has affected the normally adaptive system. In visual systems, sure, we have a list of problems that can impair vision, but we also have a great understanding of the normally adaptive visual system. And we haven't explained any problem until we can explain how a problem alters the normally adaptive system. I want to use the visual system as an example of just what it takes to understand normally adaptive systems, the scope of effort. This is Hermann Helmholtz, probably one of the greatest scientists who ever lived. And he made great contributions to physics and physiology, but he's only here because he helped with the visual system, and he's just a symbol. He's just a symbol of an entire army of scientists across all disciplines who've worked over centuries to bring us to the point that we are today. Well, what is the scope of knowledge that we get when we've studied a normally adaptive system? What do we really understand? Well, we understand structure from the very tiny, the atomic and molecular level, up to understanding the cells, up to understanding even bigger sets of cells that work together as teams. And at every level of structure, we understand what it does. We understand function. So we understand how the molecules break apart when they're hit by light. And at the other end, we understand how teams of cells work together to accomplish functions. I'm going to tell you about two different teams of cells. One team of cells tells us where a visual stimulus is in relationship to our body. But an entirely different team of cells tells us what we're looking at, connecting with long-term memory and language to give meaning. And it's knowledge like this that allows us to understand strange visual problems, like when somebody can still tell you where something is, but has no idea what it is. And then we also understand how this normally adaptive system goes from a few undifferentiated cells to the grown adult system. And all of this structure, function, development knowledge is encased in evolutionary understanding. We don't just know about the visual system in humans. We know about the visual system in our closely related other vertebrates that have a backbone like we do. But visual systems didn't evolve just once. They've evolved several times. And we also understand visual systems in invertebrate animals, rather different than we are. But Even in the case of the visual system, where we have a wonderful list of disorders and problems, we only really understand a disorder when we understand how it's disrupted or changed the normally adaptive system. And in the area of mental health, we don't even think about the normally adaptive systems. Recently, I wrote an article with my colleagues Shannon Miles and Scott Lilienfeld, and we listed 5 major adaptive systems that stand behind mental health and are essential for understanding the problems. And we were recently honored when the Society for Personality Assessment conferred on this article the Martin Maiman Award for distinguished contribution to the literature. Let me tell you about these systems. Reality modeling for action is a big, important system. A lot of the brain real estate is involved in building internal neural models of reality. In fact, all of cognitive neurosciences and the first 7 chapters of a good psychology book are about this system. A lot of good science has been done. We still have a lot more to learn. But there are clinical problems related to this system. In late-stage dementias, there can be very broad loss of function in reality modeling. In the classic psychoses, there's more specific loss, like you see in schizophrenia or the manias of bipolar affective disorder. But there are other problems you don't even think about when you hear the phrase reality modeling for action. In narcissism, a person thinks they're way up here, above all the rest of humanity, the little people. But that is so far at variance with reality that it really impairs adaptive behavior. I'm going to talk about emotion now, so we have to thank the emotion scientists and the emotion neuroscientists. The short-term danger detection system answers an ancient evolutionary question. How do I not die today? If a car is swerving toward us, the danger detection system gives us some relatively automatic responses that can save our life. And it answers another ancient evolutionary question. When am I most safe? We're most safe when we're around a few trusted friends. And it's daylight, so our visual system gives us long-range warning. And we're safe when it's not too weird, when things aren't too novel. But as our environment begins to depart from these ancient markers of safety, we feel a lack of ease, we feel anxiety. And so the clinical problems related to this system are unusual fears and uncontained anxiety. But again, they're problems we don't think about related to this system. I have a 23-year-old older son who has severe autistic problems. And he requires 24-hour supervision. He could not possibly be allowed to go outside without supervision, because if he walked into a street, he would have no normally adaptive response to a car moving toward him. And so, if you tell me my son is autistic, you haven't told me any explanation of what the devastation is in the normally adaptive danger detection. Long-term cost-benefit projection is less studied, less agreed upon, but I think it's important because in the 60,000-year rise of modern humans, we've basically had 2 types of jobs. We've either been farmers or we've been hunter-gatherers. Now, hunter-gatherers have to operate well, even in dangerous environments where the alpha predators are. They have to be in the here and now. They can't be daydreaming. But the farmer has got to have the future automatically occur to him or her, because the farmer can't eat all the seed corn. Then there's no seed for the next season. And we find that gambling and drinking and alcohol problems often go with a almost pure here and now orientation. And I will bet you that the guys who robbed the bank right next to the police station weren't thinking very far ahead. How do we get the resources that we need to stay alive and to prosper? Well, we have a resource acquisition system in which our brain will place tags called incentive salience on the objects that we perceive. Incentive salience? Well, if you haven't eaten in a couple of days and you see a cake, a beautiful cake, your brain turns up the incentive salience, and now the cake can incentivize your behavior. May I have a slice of cake, please? But supposing that you've just eaten 3 bigger cakes, and now you see the new cake, your brain will usually turn down the incentive salience. I hope yours does. Mine doesn't always do that. Now, there are important clinical problems related to the normally adaptive resource acquisition system. In depressions, the brain can turn down incentive salience on virtually everything, so the depressed person's world doesn't interest them and doesn't incentivize them anymore. In manias, we have exactly the opposite problem. Incentive salience is cranked up, and now everything gets to be so interesting, the person can start many projects and not finish any of them. The last system I'm going to talk about is agenda protection. Agenda protection is explained by the apocryphal story of the person who lifts a car off an endangered baby. Now, having a healthy baby, that's an important agenda. And when we have important agendas, our brains can tag certain objects as obstacles. And when it's an important agenda, we can't stop thinking about the obstacles, and our energy coalesces to overcome them. Now, that often serves us well, but it can be related to clinical problems like murder, sexual violence, stalking, and maybe we'll even understand war better when we understand agenda protection. So I do have a message to the public. You have been incredibly generous in supporting the study of disease, disorder, mental problems, but please be open to supporting the big effort it takes to study the normally adaptive systems. And my message to professionals is, you haven't explained any problem until you can tell us how it's affected the normally adaptive systems. So let's all work together to do perhaps decades or even centuries-long work to fill in the scientific knowledge about the normally adaptive systems that explain mental health and can help us understand mental problems. Thank you very much.